Hi. Well, welcome. This is Writing Wednesday on Thursday. I was traveling for a little bit up to the Pacific Northwest, so just scrambling to get my feet back under me. This is Writing Wednesday on Thursday, and this is where I answer your writing questions, craft questions, um, existential questions, psychological questions, even business and questions, all things writing. And uh, if you have questions for me today, put them in the chat. And if you have questions for me during the week, I can design a whole Writing Wednesday around your questions. So send me your questions through my website, janetfitchwrites.com, and I can answer your question. And believe me, if you have questions, other people have questions, the same questions. So you're just going to be spearheading something that everybody is interested in. So um, do ask away. We have a we actually have a couple questions, but this one caught my attention. So uh, it is from Rose. So Rose, if you're here, um, we're answering your question today. And hi, Bozena. Hi, Hope. Yeah, Thursday. It is what it is. Um, so the question is, um, Rose was watching the video, and all my these live videos are stored on YouTube on the channel, so they're archived. So you can catch up on back issues anytime you want. Live is only live. Uh, Hi, Sarah. No, she asked, do I have a backlog of questions? No, I tend to answer them as they come along. So if you write to me this week, it'll be next week's Writing Wednesday. Hi, Jill. Good to see you. So Rose was saying, um, I was watching the video, How Important is Imagination in Fiction Writing? So that's one of the archived Writing Wednesdays, so you can check back if you missed it. Um, and Rose says, I find solace in fiction. Stories are my safe place. Yeah, you and me both, and many of us. I can exercise my imagination within a premise of an existing story and love doing so. But when it comes to creating my own narratives, it hits the wall. As a child, it was so hard for me to come up with the most basic narratives. Oh, Sarah says she sent one a few weeks ago that might have missed me. Yeah, please resend. Um, so Rose is having imagine problems with the imagination. That as a child, it was hard to come up with basic stories. Fiction was always in the low B, high C range in school. That's American style. Back then, I only read 1 to 2 books a year, so hadn't been exposed to a lot of narrative. Um, I assumed storytelling just wasn't natural to me and was sad about it for a while. It's always been harder to draw on imagination based creativity. Now, this is interesting. I have no problem being experimental with things I've already encountered. I believe there could be an element of neurodivergence here, or a combination of not having been a reader until recently, but I'm not yet fully sure I like patterns and structure and struggle with the blank slate. This is such a good question. So, gravitate naturally towards the sciences, yet I love fiction. The few books I've read have changed my perspective on life. Someday I want to write my own story, but imagination has been an impediment. Is this something that can be trained? What exercises can help me? Thank you so much. So, first of all, I think that you have pinpointed one of the difficulties is that you don't feel that you've read enough. And that is something that is the first thing that you can you can tackle is reading. You know, I if I'm setting myself a challenge for reading, it's usually 100 books a year. That's 2 books a week. That means I have to make 90 minutes a day for reading. But if you haven't been much of a reader, um, I'm going to guess that you are still, maybe even still in school. I would suggest a book a week is doable. You figure out what your reading speed is, read for 10 minutes and, time 10 minutes and see how much, and it'll vary from book to book. Some books you have to read more slowly, some books whiz by. Um, but you'll have to start reading more. And if you know that you want to write fiction, start noticing the moves that the writer is making. Notice when they change locations. Notice when a new problem is introduced. If you can write in your books, it would be very helpful for you to start making notes on the books or in a notebook. Um, just a reading notebook, that notice how these books unfold. Um, where this seems to be imagination in terms of story, um, making up new stories. Um, so uh, Hope says she should read some of those choose your own adventure books and always ask what happens next. And you can do that not with the choose your own adventure books because that's, you know, children's children's books. But you can do that in with any book. Uh, I remember reading a short story in college. Um, it was I think it was a Coover story. And we read or no, it was Borges. We read the first, it was Coover. There was a Coover story and a Borges story. And we'd read a page of a short story, and he would stop and say, well, what do you think happens? And you'd write the possible story that would come out of that beginning, and then you'd read the rest of the story and see what the author thought happened, because that helps break it loose where you can, like Hope is indicating, you can say what happens next. You don't need to have a choose your own adventure book to do that with. You can do it with any book. What do you think happens? And probably short story easier than a novel, because you'll know within 30 pages what happens. um, so I should say that some people have a bigger imagination than others. Some people, can sit and create out of whole cloth, a whole world. Some people just have, incredible imaginations. And then other people do better writing fictional versions of things that they've encountered or using things they've encountered as the basis for fiction. So, say you, as a not super imaginative person, you can start with a fictionalized version of what happened to put pressure on a character that might be closer to you than a purely imagined character. But say something else happens. So you start out with that summer that you had to spend with Aunt Jo in Chicago, and you're 15, you're in the suburbs, and you can't get around, and she wants you to practice tennis against a wall for an hour and you're sitting there and you know what happened, but say it's a fictional character. So you fictionalize a little bit. How is that character different than you? Can they be tall? Can they be short? Can they be, you know, a different gender? Can they be, how are you going to make them different from you? And then instead of what actually happened, think what could have happened. You know, I could have hitchhiked into Chicago instead of sitting there bouncing the ball against the wall. Or I could have run into a kid from the neighborhood who had other plans for the afternoon and have had an adventure with this other kid. Um, so, one of the important questions to ask yourself is what could have happened? Um, when I was a kid, I was a, a, a complete fantasist. It was more than a fantasist. I couldn't tell the difference between what actually happened and what might have happened. So I got in trouble for doing that because people thought I was a liar. And I was, I was a liar too. But also it's a better story if something else happened, if some guy on a motorcycle, dove through the crowd at my elementary school and did something and took us off on an adventure. That is taking what happened and moving it over into a more interesting story. So if you're somebody who tends to be locked into their what actually happened, um, try nudging it towards what might have happened. What could so easily have happened if one thing was different? Um, uh, the Hope says, I've always enjoyed, love Choose Your Own Adventure. So check that out. But you can make your own, and you can make that in your life too. What if I hadn't married that guy? What if I had just at some point, recognized that X was going to happen and went off with his best friend? What if? What if is your if you're somebody who bases their fiction largely on what you only can see what happened, and it's very difficult for you to imagine. Um, uh, what if is your friend? What if? Um, what if my Aunt Jo had disappeared that summer? So I'm pissed that I'm like trying to, having to play tennis against the wall. So boring. And came home and Aunt Jo had disappeared. Then what if? Now you're in the fictional zone. Um, you Most people need a psychic connection to the stories and characters that they're creating. They don't create them out of whole cloth. They base a character on, say, if I want an impatient character, I might think of like 4 people that I know who are impatient and give that character qualities of that person. So you don't have to have uh, a phenomenal imagination to write fiction. But you have to move, nudge the story away from what actually happened into what if? What if this happened? What if my friend was a little edgier than they were? What if I was a little bit more adventurous than I was? And nudge it until something else presents itself that still could have happened. I'm not saying that leprechauns, hi Marie, I'm not saying that leprechauns descend from the chandelier or something. If you don't have that kind of imagination, then, you know, there are all kinds of imaginations. And um, the ways of exercising the imagination, what if is your best friend. So if you have nothing else from this hour, just write down what if, and always ask yourself, what if something happened else? What if it was slightly different? What if the car broke down? What if you had no cell phone reception there? What if, you know, you encountered something that you weren't expecting? Um, Another thing that helps train the imagination that you want to put in your bag of tricks is in creating a character different from you. Um, you can do exercises as opposed to experimenting on the work that you're trying to do, just nudging the imagination at all times towards something new. So even if it's using um, I have exercises, sentence exercises, where we use metaphor. So when I teach this, I teach um, basically it's like cliche bus, getting out of cliches, hot as hell, cold as ice, white as milk, and it's all the same. Hi Peggy, good to see you. Um, so what you do is you start by taking the standards, hot as cold, hot as hell, cold as ice, black as coal or ink or whatever. What 99 out of 100 people would say. My teacher, Kate Braverman, um, used to call that the family feud answer, where you get points if you say the thing that everybody would say. In fiction's the opposite. You get a point if you don't say the thing that everyone would say, because that's why people read you, is to get something new. So you push the imagination in that way. You know, how red was it? We've heard lipstick red, we've heard, that kind of thing. Anything you've heard before ever is a cliche, banned. So you say, what color red? What kind of red was it? What color red were those shoes that she wore when she comes into the club? And, the first things that come to mind will always be the cliches, fire engine red, et cetera, lipstick red. So then you start playing. Yeah, Soviet flag red. That's interesting. You start for more interesting colors. A heartbreak red, um, you know, Jello. Couch staining Jello red, um, and then you can get into colors that don't exist. You know, a red, the color of my boyfriend's Mustang in 1965. I didn't have a boyfriend in 1965. So you're already making it up. You're already finding little corners of the imagination. And it doesn't take much, um, it won't take much commitment when you're doing exercises. It's just exercise, fun. But it works out the imagination. It forces you to say, what kind of reds are there? And try 10 of them. Figure out 10 different, take a red that already exists that you can find a paint chip. I love paint chips. I love color, these color exercises. And um, you decide, what red the color of, you know, my mother's car as she drove away for the last time. So it has an emotional quality to it. even if your mother never drove a red car. It has an emotional quality to it. These are, green, the color of a Romulan heartbreak. Who knows what Romulan heartbreak, what color that is? But if you want it to be a green, so it taps into the imagination, like nail polish colors, absolutely. If you go to the hardware store, always take paint chips. And then just look at a paint chip and go, what, okay, it's buttercream, they call this sort of yellowy white. Um, what other color could that be? And, just challenge yourself, do the hot, how hot was it? How cold was it? How tall was he? Um, Chandler is a great source for metaphors like that. He's the master of the metaphor, understatement, overstatement, um, ways of describing uh, objects and all kinds of things in terms of wonderful metaphor. Um, a 69-cent alarm clock ticked on the peeling gray white paint of the bureau. It ticked loud enough to shake the walls. How loud was it? It was loud enough to shake the walls. It was loud enough, like how loud was that plaid? You know, it was loud enough to shake the paint off the walls. I mean, of course it's not, but you use the different senses. Um, a plaid isn't loud. A plaid is a pattern on fabric. But we know what loud in the body, how we experience the word loud, um, the concept of loud, so that the plaid couch, it's not going to keep you up at night, but you could say that plaid on his couch was so loud nobody was going to sleep that night. Um, so that's a challenge. You can challenge yourself, and it stretches the imagination a little bit, little bit. Um, you uh, a good imagine exercise is, you know, seeing a phenomenon and trying to expand the way you can describe it, the way you can see it. So, a very fun thing to do is to describe people in terms of animals so that they each, I don't know if everybody does this in high school, but you name people for animals because that's how you see them or you can't imagine them. You know, one's own animal is usually unflattering. Um, but it's an imaginative exercise that you can give yourself, and just to try to find ways to stretch your imagination so you can have a little more confidence in yourself as a creator. Um, I think that Rose's is particularly concerned with her ability to imagine uh, different plot elements, to imagine events rather than people and language. But I urge you to continue to work every bit of imagination that you can start. You can't train yourself to be, a super like my husband. Doesn't ever write about himself or anybody he knows. It just comes out, like out of whole cloth, right out of his head. I can't do that. I have to connect to everything emotionally. So a piece of myself is in everything I create. I have to do that. If it's out of whole cloth, for me, it's just paper dolls. I don't. I don't work. I can't work that way. I don't have that kind of imagination. I have the kind of imagination that can get a situation and characters who carry certain aspects of myself. So for me, a novel has every character in a novel is like a different part of myself. It's like a dream. You know, they say in a dream, everyone is you. So what happens is the psyche parts out the various aspects of yourself that are kind of at war in your unconscious life. It's why decision making, people have trouble with decision making because different parts of themselves are interacting. And they're, you know, one side says, go for it. And the other side says, you know, you've got to be crazy to do that. And then you know, there, you can hear the jangle in your head. And one of the great things about fiction is you can take this voice and give it to this character, and you could take this attitude and give it to that character, and then they can interact on the page, and you can see how they interact, what happens to people who are all this or all that, and then you can make your decision of who wins, who is this, you know, who's going to come out of this thing in better shape. Um, you know, it's like we had White Oleander. Um, you know, it's like I took all of my um, kind of artistic narcissism and gave it to the mother, Ingrid, the murderer. I took all my vulnerability and gave it to one of the foster mothers. And she was very kind and she was very helpful for that kid that she had was fostering, but she herself wasn't stable enough to really stand up to the pressures of life. Just too vulnerable, too sensitive. So there I learned something about myself, you know. Oh, if you're all your sensitivity, you know, you're going to get eaten by the world. If you're all your narcissistic, artistic self, you might do something on the artistic level, but you're going to be a nightmare for those around you. Um, if you're all your, you know, one character was like my commercial side. She was a swap meet entrepreneur, and I've got that side to myself. I love that stuff. So you can part out your psyche and play with different parts of it. So the fact that you say you can't make up things very well. Um, I don't think you have to. I think that you have to ask yourself, what if something happened? You have to push for conflict. You push for conflict, believe me, something's going to happen. And it doesn't have to be what actually happened. Once you push for conflict, um, you will find it. And the conflict will propel the story all by itself. Um, I think that the absence of a strong antagonist will hurt your, you know, if you have a strong antagonist, something will happen because there's no way the protagonist can avoid the conflict. It pushes them onward and they have to learn how to maneuver in a world where this kind of pressure is going to be on them. um, I think that, you know, but things, imagination, imagine yourself in other people's shoes. I mean, I think that's what fiction is all about. um, and maybe it's why people are writing more memoir, that it's getting harder for people to imagine themselves in another person's shoes, which is sad, you know. um, if you're having trouble with imagination, you know, picture somebody, meet somebody, go to a donut shop and sit there and look at somebody and tell us who they are. That's something I used to assign in, um, when I taught junior high students. I would have them go somewhere and pick someone and tell us about them. You know, I think that people, in our current era, often it's like they look at other people like they're pieces of cardboard. They're just like items in the way, of what you want to do. And I think that fiction writing in particular stimulates curiosity about other people. And so allow yourself that curiosity, allow yourself to make assumptions about people. And I don't mean just assume the negative about them, but ask yourself, who are they? One of the things I do when I teach creative writing in junior high is, I mean, I do it in grad school too, but it's fun to do with the junior high students. Uh, One of the exercises I have them do is something I call the supermarket sweep, where I have them go to the market, stand behind somebody in line with their mom or whatever, and look at what they have in their basket, make a list of what they see in their basket, and then tell us about that person. You can look at them and what they're wearing and what they look like, and then start to tell a story. Give them a name, ask themselves, are they married? Are they single? Where do they live? Um, how do they live? What do they do for living? What's going on with them? And you can end up with quite a new character that way. You can see the world, the exterior world that isn't a mirror of you. It is, of course it is sort of, because you're seeing it, but you're starting to be curious about other people. And even if the story you make up about them is completely wrong, you are learning to make up a story about people. I remember, and then some people have a very hard time with it. Um, when I did this supermarket sweep, I had one student who could not look at a woman wearing a wraparound denim skirt, kind of chunky, no makeup, with a sheet cake and 24 juice boxes, and couldn't figure out that that was a birthday party. That was a mom getting a birthday party ready, um, for a bunch of kids. So you use the stuff, but mostly people could use the stuff in the basket to start telling us about that person. You see a guy, in work clothes, kind of sharp looking though, um, buying bottled like jugs of water and roasted chickens, like pre-roasted chickens. That's a guy buying lunch for a work site. And I gave him a name, and I gave him a wife, and I gave him children, and his conflict with different children, and ended up telling a story about him. You ask yourself questions. So there's what if is always good. But, what's their name? How old are they? Where do they live? Imagine their house. I mean, I kind of was trained by my mother, who was incredibly curious about other people. She wasn't a writer, but very curious about other people. And she would take me to the bank, or, they drag you on errands when you're very small. And she'd point out somebody and she'd say, "Tell me about that person. What do they do for a living? Where do they live? Are they married? Do they have kids?" And I'd like start telling a story about, this about Carol and what she did for a living, and she just broke up with her boyfriend, and she's been gaining weight, and she um, watches this on television, and she reads stuff like this, and on vacation, where does she go? And you use your imagination to create a character based on nothing but looking at other people and making guesses about them. Uh, there's a wonderful song when I was growing up, Simon and Garfunkel song called America. So The kids are on the, college age probably, on the bus, and they pretend like there's somebody on the bus who's a spy. And what if they are a spy? And then they get into this whole spy fantasy. You know, imagine, you're sitting at the McDonald's or whatever and pick somebody and go, okay, that's a spy. And I have to do something, or what are they looking for? What's the drop? What's the crime? Um, and if you're not if you're not used to this kind of thing, the the weirder it is for you, the better it is for you. If you've never done this kind of thing before, it'll be better for you than for anybody else. Because this is starting to train the imagination, and a lot of it is curiosity about other people. And you can keep this stuff in a notebook. I'm always a big proponent of keeping writers' notebooks. And this kind of thing adds to the writer's notebook as you observe character, you observe detail about them, and then you go into the imagination. Listen to a song and imagine that story. Imagine those people. Imagine something that's not in the song. What do they do after the song is over? What do they read? Are they late night people, or do they get up early? Do they have pets? Do they live in the city? Do they live in the country? Um, what does their best friend think of them? And start sniffing around what you know. So a lot of fiction writers are not, I'm not highly imaginative. I'm not one of those people who is going to create a world, um, Dune or whatever. That's not coming out of my head. But you start working around what you know or see, and see what you can accrue to that sort of a center magnet that you've envisioned or that you've encountered. You see this, girl tripping along in her platform shoes with her very short skirt. She's pulling it down. Um, where is she going? What's her name? Where is she? Does she go to school? What's her major? What does she want to do tonight? Who does she hope to meet tonight? Or is she meeting someone? Um, if there's a group of people, imagine what is the dynamic within that group of people. You see three old ladies or four old ladies on a park bench. What are who are they? They're all going to be different. And this is the way when they say fiction encourages our humanity, it's our empathy that we can look at people and understand there's a whole story there. They're not just cardboard cutouts. Um, and reading is going to be tremendously important to you. If you're not reading a book a week and you want to be a writer and you haven't read much, if you don't only read a few books a year, um, you're going to have trouble even envisioning the basics of how people tell stories. Um, so I definitely up the reading. And I love the idea of reading a page of a short story, a page and a half, and then trying to figure out what the rest of the story is going to be about, and then reading it and going like, oh my God, that's what happens, you know? And so that's the surprise that you give a reader who will be guessing when you read your stuff, when they read your stuff, they will be guessing what happens in this book. And you always want to do something else than what they expect. That's the fun part. Okay, so we have some questions here. So Bozena says, let's start with Hope. Hope has a great tip for writing dialogue, to eavesdrop on conversations and write them down. That's interesting. It gives you some although conflict, dialogue in fiction is about conflict, and people, the way people speak doesn't, it is really good, but it often is not, doesn't get to the issues that underlie. So grain of salt when you deal with real conversations, but listen to people talk to each other, absolutely, and write it down. It's a great, great exercise. Really tunes the ear to tone, rhythm, and then who might be who in the relationships. Um, Bozena says, we discussed a similar topic some time ago, and I recommended Diane Ackerman's books. Yeah, uh, um, the Spell of the Sensuous, is that hers? The Natural History of the Senses is hers. Um, so, in the way of making up sense detail, finding language for sense detail, and avoiding the cliche and using metaphor um, for, um, you know, and killing the cliche. How hot was it? Well, it was so hot. So, first, the thing everybody would say is the thing nobody should say in fiction. That's what a cliche is. You always want to be fresh. And then Sarah says, as a kid, I used to create entire musicals based on albums and act out all the parts, only child problems. Well, that's interesting. Um, so it is a very good idea to let music stimulate the imagination. The senses can go both ways. They can contact both memory and imagination. A taste is often uh, a smell and taste go back to childhood. They go back to memory. Whereas something like music can take you off in a different direction. I mean, I don't think when you go to the symphony, and, I don't know who's a big symphonic listener. Um, I don't think 10% of an audience at a symphony is actually listening. Yeah, it's like, okay, the cellos are doing this, and look at that, and that transition and that motif, and are staying right on the surface with the music. I think at least 60% of people are seeing images, are going somewhere with the music. Um, and if you're struggling with imagination, that's a really good thing to do, is listen to classical music, or listen to jazz, listening to something that's not story oriented, um, and letting it take you somewhere. Where are you listening to that? What does it stimulate in you? And then write that down. Um, Really, that's a very helpful for training the imagination. But you need to be reading a book a week minimum if you want to be a writer, and really noticing the moves that the uh, that the writer is getting. How is it laid out? How do they handle foreshadowing? How do they handle um, do they do multiple character dialogue scenes, or is it mostly one person? Is it very internal? Um, is it, look at the points of view and how the point of view is it passed around, or does it stay with one person? Is it first person or third, present or past? And find ways, if you weren't particularly imaginative as a child, the things that children do. Um, you might want to dabble in that a bit, like Sarah's idea of creating a musical based on albums. um, at least go into the world of favorite album. um, where are you, when is it, where is it, who is it? um, Listening to narrative songs, things that are very evocative of time and place, just put you in a world the way fiction does. It's the same thing. It's the same impulse. Um, and you might find a character that you can connect with emotionally. Uh, but pure imagination, some people are better at that. And you cannot learn to be that. You cannot learn to be Borges. You cannot learn to have that kind of imagination, but you can expand from where you are. You can push out the walls. Reading Borges, reading some of these people, Calvino, people who have these tremendous imaginations, um, will flavor what you can produce. It's like looking at surrealist painting. It's like, oh, a watch, a clock can melt. That's really interesting. You know, what else can melt? You know, somebody's yelling at you and, the phone is melting. You start to, in extensively reading, you start to see some of the possibilities. Curiosity about other people. And then that can be the basis of imagination. Doesn't have to be leprechauns and dragons and all that. Imagination can be very much in this world. I had I was at a restaurant, and there was a famous actor, Jason Robards, who was having dinner with another man, and there were two children with them, and they were completely ignoring those kids and having this conversation. The kids were bored out of their minds and throwing bread balls at each other, and the dads didn't even notice. And to me, that's a story. That's not a story about me, but I can relate. I can emotionally relate to those kids, and having to listen to adults go blah 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 about stuff that as adults we're probably super more interested in what's Jason Robards talking about than kids throwing bread balls. But in terms of character, in terms of people uncomfortable in the moment and wanting to explode the moment, two grown-ups yapping is not as full of conflict as those kids having to endure that. I remember going to a gallery and seeing a kid. It was an opening, so everybody's got their wine and blah, blah, and they're all, standing really close, and they're wonderfully dressed people. And there was this kid. Somebody brought a kid to an art opening, which is really shitty anyway, and didn't bring any toys for them, no books, no nothing. And he was sitting against the wall, looking really unhappy, and he was zipping his sweater up and down, up and down. And it's like I could just enter that kid. I could be that kid. And just something, I can imagine writing a story about him and something happening at that art uh, opening that would bear on those neglectful parents who thought to bring him with nothing to play with. What dicks. Okay, so Eki Sare, hi, says, do you think if I imagine people as characters will make them uncomfortable? You mean looking at people? You have to be willing to look at people if you want to write fiction. It doesn't mean you have to be cool. You can't like stare and write about, like that it's obvious that you're writing about them, you know. But you look over and then you look down at your book, maybe you turn away, write a little bit, you take another look, so yeah, you do have to be somewhat chill to look at, but you know, you can't be afraid to look at people. And then, you can't be afraid to make assumptions. A lot of people have trouble with that. They look at somebody and it's like people are complete mystery, like they have never been a person or known one, and they look at a person and it's like, I'm looking at a person in a donut shop and who knows who she is? I don't know. I don't know that many people, I don't know. You have to be able to make a guess and go with your guess. That's fiction is a lot like tightrope walking that way. It's like step at a time. It's not even tightrope. It's like in the cartoons where they're walking across and there is no tightrope. That a little at a time, you make an assumption, you think about them, you know, girl, is this somebody who works there on their break? You notice the bitten nails, you notice the peeling nail polish, they've got a phone, they're say 18, they're definitely an older teen, but they have little girl things. The phone is like a Hello Kitty, um, the backpack. And then it's like, okay, so this is somebody struggling with the transition between childhood and adulthood, which is a really tender moment. Let's call her something. Let's call her Denise. And who is Denise? And where is she in the birth order? Does she have brothers? Does she have sisters? Or both? And then is she oldest? Is she youngest? What are her ambitions? What's her favorite subject in school? Is she good at sports? Is she lousy at sports? How does she feel about that? What's her safe place? What is her home life? And nobody's going to look at this. This is exercise for you. So you don't have to worry about that you're going to offend somebody because nobody is going to know what you're writing. But you are doing reps. It's like going to the gym and exercising your imagination. Um, if you mean by your question, do I imagine people as characters will make them uncomfortable to read it on the page? um, that you have to disguise them a bit, especially if they know you. Um, make them, if they're blonde, make them a brunette. If they're skinny, make them chunky. Whatever you need to do to kind of cover your tracks. Um, it's one of the good things about fiction as opposed to memoir or autobiography is it doesn't have it doesn't have to be fact checked. You have room to change things to cover your tracks. So I always recommend that. Well, any last questions before we check out here? Um, I thank you for coming to write. Good, so that helped. Eki, sorry. I'm glad that helped. I hope it did. And, push your imagination, especially if you don't think you have a good imagination. Then you need more reps. You need to work out that. So thank you. Thank you for coming. Good to see you all. And we'll see you next week on Wednesday for Writing Wednesday. So thank you. Bye.